So we said that cardiac muscle is also classified as being striated, which just means that it has the presence of sarcomeres, and those sarcomeres gives it a string-like or a striated appearance, okay? So it's similar to skeletal muscle in that way. Smooth muscle, we said, did not have any striations. Now, cardiac muscle is also going to be regulated by troponin and tropomyosin. We did not see those proteins in smooth muscle, right? But they will be regulating proteins in cardiac muscle. Now, there's also going to be gap junctions, and we talked a little bit about what gap junctions do. When we left off last time, we said that gap junctions allow cells to communicate to each other, right? And that's going to maintain the synchronicity or the uniqueness, or the collectiveness of the cells. Okay, so similar to what we saw with that single unit smooth muscle, cells are speaking to one another or communicating, and that is going to be present in cardiac muscle. And the structure on which we find those gap junctions is called the intercalated disc. We're going to talk more about what that is. Now, cardiac muscle cells also display the ability to excite themselves. This is the pacemaker ability that we talked about last time. Okay, and we said that pacemaker ability is spontaneous depolarization. So in the absence of neural input, these cells can stimulate themselves or depolarize themselves to threshold. Now, the cardiac muscle is under the autonomic nervous system, so that's involuntary control. We do not get to decide what our heart rate looks like, okay? It's not voluntarily controlled. And we also saw that, like smooth muscle, the source of calcium is going to be from two places here. Right? The source of calcium is going to be from the outside of the cell, as well as the storage area in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So this is a similar phenomenon that we saw in smooth muscle, where there were two sources of calcium. Now, lastly, we'll talk about the action potential in a cardiac muscle cell. All right, so because the action potential of a cardiac muscle cell has quite a long refractory period, right? It has a long refractory period. There is no summation here. Okay, the length of the action potential is the same amount of time that it takes for that cell to fully contract. Okay, so there's no time for action potentials to build up. This is what we saw in skeletal muscle, right? The twitch was very long. So we had several action potentials in the time it took to complete one twitch. That is not possible in cardiac muscle, just because the action potential takes the same amount of time as the cardiac muscle cell does to contract. Okay. All right, so let's look at this question before we delve into today's topic. All right, so which of these is the primary purpose of the cardiovascular system? What do we think? Which of these is the primary purpose, or describes the primary purpose of the cardiovascular system? I think I heard all of them. Perfect, thank you. All of these qualities, or all of these are important, okay? So when we talk about the cardiovascular system, we're talking about the heart primarily, but we want to bear in mind that we're also talking about the blood vessels and the blood. So just to describe the function of the heart for you, the heart is a pump. Okay, its job is to pump blood around the entire body. Okay, so it's going to generate enough force to push that blood throughout the body. Now, the blood vessels are a conduit, right? A conduit meaning that they're carrying the blood inside of them. And these are a network of vessels that run throughout the entire body. And the blood is the actual liquid substance that's moving in those vessels. So together, these three components are very important in transporting things throughout the body. It's going to be like a messenger system or like a highway system. Very important in moving things, substances, proteins, hormones throughout the body. Oxygen, waste products, okay? So the first or the most important function of the heart and of the cardiovascular system is transport, right? Transport. Transport of oxygen and nutrients to the tissues, right? So your vital organs, your kidney, your bladder, your liver needs to be fed with nutrients and oxygen, and the heart is going to pump that blood. The vessels are going to carry that blood, and the blood is carrying the oxygen in it, right? It's also going to remove waste products. So when those cells secrete their carbon dioxide, secrete their waste products, ammonia, and so on, the blood is going to take that waste from the cells and deliver it to the liver or to the kidney to be detoxified. In the case of carbon dioxide, it's going to be delivered to the lungs where we can exhale it or breathe it out. Okay, so transport is a big job here. Also, the movement of hormones. So we talked about two glands earlier in the semester, the endocrine glands and the exocrine glands. Specifically, which gland used the blood? Which one of these glands release their secretions into the blood? Can anyone remember? The endocrine, right? The endocrine. So the endocrine glands release their hormones into the blood, and that hormone is circulated via the vascular system, right? There's also clotting proteins that prevent you from bleeding out. If one of the vessels are injured, right, they're going to go to that site and clot the blood, which is going to heal that vessel nicely. All right, so let's look at the structure of the cardiovascular system. Now in the center here, we see the heart, okay? And the heart is basically an organ with 4 chambers or 4 areas for holding blood. We have 2 chambers on the top. These are called atria. The singular for that is atrium. All right, so we have 2 rounded atria on the top, and their job is going to be to collect blood, right? To collect blood and to pass it along to the ventricles. Now on the bottom, we have 2 additional chambers. These are called ventricles. All right, so we have atria and ventricles. And their job, the job of the ventricles, is going to be to pump blood out of the heart. Now, I want you to bear in mind here, we have a left atrium and a left ventricle. We have a right atrium and a right ventricle. The atria and the ventricles are going to communicate, but the left and the right side of the heart does not communicate. So the blood on the left side of the heart never interacts with the blood on the right side of the heart. All right, that's going to be very important as we talk about the flow of blood. So blood is going to move from a ventricle out to the rest of the body, right? It's going to come in through an atria and then to a ventricle again. We're going to talk about that flow in a little bit. Now, what we're also seeing here is the presence of these vessels, right? These are important vessels that are bringing blood to the heart and taking blood away. The 2 main ones that we're going to talk about today is the pulmonary trunk. This is the pulmonary trunk and the aorta, right? The aorta. The aorta is the main vessel that feeds the body with oxygenated blood, right? The aorta is the main vessel that feeds the entire body with oxygenated blood. Whereas the pulmonary trunk is the main vessel that feeds the lungs, and it's going to take deoxygenated blood, and we'll talk about what those mean as we move on, back to the lungs to be freshly deoxygenated. So those 2 vessels are going to be important to identify as we move on. Also important are the presence of these valves, right? So there are 4 valves in the heart. We'll talk about where they are and what they do, but I want you to remember, right, that they are between the atria and the ventricles, right? We have a valve here, and then exiting the heart into that vessel, we have another valve. We're going to talk about differentiating those valves as we move on.